Dennis, are you ready to bring up your plenary session?
Yes, we are ready.
Okay. And Rose, did you want to just bring up the title track? Or do you just want to start talking, Dennis?
Yes, I can start. Hi everyone. My name is Dennis Uyat. I use they them pronouns. Let's hand it to Alejandra. That was a really great presentation, a hard act to follow. And we're gonna be transitioning now to our first plenary, which is called Future Focus: Perspectives on Zero Waste. And so in recent years, a lot of attention in the zero waste conferences that I've attended has been on how do we, make lifestyle changes, like how do we do these sort of things to better manage the materials that we use every day. And so in this session, we're going to be talking about more of more about people and how waste affects people. And so uh, we have speakers from Rafaelo joining all the way from the Philippines after midnight right now. We have Whitney Amaya, who is a really awesome anti-incinerator organizer in Long Beach, as well as Rachna Shah. I think Rachna, you're in New York, as well as Nivi Achanta. Um, and we're going to hear a lot of different perspectives from complex systems theory to um, how things happen in the Philippines, and as well as a campaign on the incinerator. And so I'm going to start us off with Rachna. Um, let me see. So Rachna is a zero waste consultant with Common Ground Compost, and she's going to be talking about systems change. So I'll just go ahead and hand it off to Rachna, and take it away.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me here. Just going to. Dennis, I cannot access my slides after all. Will you please put them up for me? I'm so sorry. I'll start talking while he's doing that, or while they are doing that. Okay, hi everyone. So I'm talking today a little bit about complexity theory, which is a huge topic, and it's one that's actually very challenging to squeeze into 10 minutes, but I'm going to do my best to give an overview. So when I think of complexity systems, it's actually, I want everyone here to take a big zoom out from the work you do, and and that's what the perspective we're going to look at this all from. The part of the problem with the way we do things is that we kind of approach problems the same way we would if we were fixing a watch, for example, a broken watch. Yes, thank you. So when you fix a broken watch, there are these very concrete components. They work in an expected way. And there's really no kind of emergence. And the problems that we're having today is because we use this kind of thinking, reductionist thinking, to solve problems that are actually complex systems. Next slide, please. What I've done is there's going to be a link at the end, so I've taken an article written by Donella Meadows, who is basically the queen of systems thinking, and she wrote many books and articles on the topic. She's passed away a few years ago, unfortunately, but the Donella Meadows Institute exists, and her work really carries on. I took this article that she wrote, which talks about leverage points in a complex system. So when we're talking about leverage points, we're talking about what levers can we pull in a complex system to actually create change, and not just change, but durable long-term system change, right? So I think of a lot of the protests I've been to, and I think of the signs that say system change, not climate change. So there's this awareness that systems change is needed, and resources like this can guide us on how to do that. But the problem then, for me at least, was this is a little bit of abstract. So how do I kind of make this more local and accessible? And so what I did is I wrote an article on this, which is linked in the last slide. And I'll put the link in the chat after I'm done speaking. But I took it and I applied this. Next slide, please. I took this and I applied it to the system that I work in. So I work as a zero waste consultant at a company called Common Ground Compost. We are a zero waste services company, and we work with everyone from corporate real estate portfolios and corporate offices to restaurants to institutions and schools and events and so many kind of aspects. And I take the knowledge from my experience with the New York City municipal solid waste system. So this is the complex system that I investigate in my article, and I use her framework and I provide examples. So if you're interested in this, feel free to, access them through the links. I've actually made them the direct PDF available, so you don't have to go, sign up for accounts and all that. So check it out if you're interested, and that'll be at the end. Okay, so I took that's kind of the context here. Next slide. Okay, so what is a complex system? Just to kind of define this for those of us who haven't heard of this terminology. A complex system is a network of, okay, so next slide. Thank you, by the way, Dennis, for doing this. A complex system is a network of heterogeneous components that interact. So think about, you've got to have components that interact. So this exists in the watch, right? They have components that interact. So far, we don't know if the watch is a complex system or not. I mean, we do, but also the components should be heterogeneous. So this is where it starts to differ. In a machine, often the parts are going to be homogeneous, or, they're just going to, they're interchangeable, right? Whereas in a system of people or a colony of ants or anything like that, each actor or agent is heterogeneous. Next slide. They all interact non-linearly, right? So in unexpected ways. And then, next slide, they give rise to this emergent behavior. So when you see kind of really beautiful patterns in the sky of birds flying, schools of fish, or human beings who are in lines, waiting to do things, sometimes that behavior is not expected. It's not planned. It just emerges when these agents work together, right? So this is kind of the definition that we're working with. Some characteristics. So now let's think about the New York City waste system that I was telling you that I work within, which is a complex system. So it has this integrity or wholeness, right? So that means you could almost think of that system as if it was a human body, it has all these parts that the sanitation workers, right? The consultants like me, the people who are generating waste, and the companies that are, all of these, the haulers, the landfill operators, all of these are kind of like organs in this system, right? So that's that wholeness that we're talking about. It's adaptive and resilient. I'm thinking of the pandemic that passed and how much the system had to adapt and be resilient, and it did. It's evolutionary, right? So it's always changing. It's goal seeking, which I'll talk about in a minute. Self-preserving, self-organizing. So these are kind of the hallmarks of a complex system. Next slide. So I'm not going to talk about this because, limited time, but in the article, so what I really encourage anyone who's interested in this is to read either Dinella Meadows' article or mine or both, and try to do this work to the system that you work within, right? So it could be, the things that you determine are different levers are going to be different than what I determine in the system that I was analyzing. But again, a lot of this is abstract. And then if you take someone through it with the examples, it's a little bit easier to understand. So I highly encourage you do this because it's a very, thought-provoking activity, and it really leads to some exciting conclusions. So when you're doing the mapping, you want to know, what is your state, like what are you measuring for, kind of, what is the state of the system, what are the inflows, outflows, and what's the goal? So next slide. So again, in my case, what we're like measuring here, what the system is the total volume of waste in New York City, right? That's my stock. The inflows is going to be all the waste created by residents, businesses, institutions. All of that is inflowing and increasing the total volume of waste. And outflow is when it gets sent to landfill, incineration, whether it's dumped in an ocean. But I had to add a flow because we have to alter these maps based on what's applicable to our system. So of course here, a lot of it is recycled or composted. So that actually goes back into the inflow, right? So that's curve number 1 there. And then the goal, and this is very important, there's a goal for our city to reduce solid waste by 90% by 2030. And that was outlined in one of our plans from many years ago when Michael Bloomberg was our mayor. So once we have that goal, then we can measure based on that goal. And so that's our perceived state. And we can kind of see what the discrepancy is and be able to make changes to both the inflows and outflows in order to continue to reach our goal. And that's what we've been doing as a city for many years. Next slide. Okay, so this is a picture of Danilo Meadows speaking at the where kind of this idea of these levers came about. So she says this: what bubbled up in me that day was distilled from decades of rigorous analysis of many different kinds of systems done by many smart people. But complex systems are, well, complex, and it's dangerous to generalize about them. What you are about to read is a work of progress. It's not a recipe for finding leverage points, but rather it's an invitation to think more broadly about systems change. So let's take a look at that list. Next slide. Okay, so these are the levers, and there's a lot to go through. I once did this talk for a whole hour and I went through each one. So next slide. Today I've decided to focus on just a few of those, and I'll tell you which ones. So the first 4 or 5 or 5 I refer to as low impact levers. Okay, so, and even though there's a yawn emoji at the bottom, it kind of means they are not as impactful as ones we'll talk about further on. However, they are still important. I do want to stress that. So it's not worth skipping. It's just worth understanding the context. Okay, next slide. So let's talk about that one right at the top: constraints, parameters, and numbers. So really, excuse me. So Meadows puts these last on her list because she equates adjusting parameters with diddling with the details or adjusting faucets, or put in the best way, arranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. The thing is that these actually command 99% of our attention. And that hyper focus, it makes sense when we realize that for government officials with this, like, a lot of reign and access to power, but a very limited window to deliver results, these are the ones that they really cling on to, right? Because their short-term nature of these kind of levers matches their terms in office. So think of this as like adding fees and penalties, tickets, fines, things that another administration could easily kind of like change and wipe out, which often happens when we see in politics, right? So again, we spend 99% of our attention on fiddling with these constraints and numbers, parameters, when they really are the least effective for durable system change. Next slide. Okay, so skipping ahead now, another like 5 ahead, number 9 on the list is the length of delays relative to the rate of system change. So a lot of the consequences of the role of waste in like global crises are similarly slow to reach the public. So for example, methane emissions, like waste is responsible for 20% of all methane emissions, but they're hard to measure. And if they're not done in real time, and there's this delay here. Another example would be the health effects of microplastics, which are only now being really studied very rigorously. But even as production hurdles forward, it's baselined on the growth of plastics from the past, which is like very exponential, right? So we don't know, again, we don't know the effects of the microplastics, and but the delay is going to happen, which affects our ability to make change. So how do we lessen that delay, right? We can increase research, we can increase communication of the effects, the health effects of microplastics in that example, in order to, and that's the way we pull on this lever, for example. Okay, moving on to medium impact levers. The next 3 or 4 are I determine as medium impact levers. Next slide. So this one is my favorite. It's only one I'm going to talk about here. The structure of information flows. So if you look at this image, if we had just added a little meter on top of our faucet every time we used it, every time we wash dishes, every time we wash our hands, every time we brush our teeth, and all it simply said was, you just used 5.6 gallons of water. This act of adding information, not incentivizing anyone to use less, not penalizing them or rewarding them, really just showing them the information, is actually a pretty strong level. It's a medium impact lever to creating long-term durable change, right? So these are very inexpensive often, but it's adding this like missing information loop, right? So this can be a really powerful way to do it. And the way I talk about it in the article I wrote is waste metrics for businesses are it's like a black hole. Like if you're a building manager, you might have really good metrics on energy and water, but almost nothing on waste. And so my company has a spinoff called WATS, W-A-T-S, that's trying to actually provide this information, because we know it's such an important lever in creating that change. Next slide. And then finally, we're going to get into high impact levers. Again, I can't really get deeply into this, but I'm just going to quickly talk about it. Next slide. So as opposed to fines, penalties, fees, and tickets that are like the least effective, changing the actual rules of the systems are considered a high impact lever. WATS, just to answer, I see a question. WATS, WATS is a spinoff from my company, Common Ground Compost, but it did start, and we work together very closely. So yeah, going back to the rules of the system. So this is actually, when I talked to you about the goal that Mayor Bloomberg, when he actually created this plan with this goal, and that was, at that point, it was 25 years out to reduce waste by 90%. Now I know we're about 8 years away. That simple rule change had so many trickle down effects and created such long-term durable system change this is the place where we want to really focus. And I think we all know this. And I think even in politics, we're seeing this happen, with, people know that the highest places that you make change, it will trickle down, right? So this can be one thing that we can focus our energy on. Next slide. So for example, there was a global survey that surveyed over 20,000 people in over 28 countries, and 75% of all the people surveyed supported a single-use plastic ban, right? So using this kind of information to rally our local governments and our state and federal governments to make changes is what's going to be really important. Next slide. And sorry, next one. I'm going to skip this.
One more minute, just a quick reminder.
Yep, I'm wrapping up. Thank you, Dennis. Number 4, the fourth most important lever is the power to self-organize. So this is when I'm getting frustrated in my job and like things are not changing, I think of the things that people have self-organized, like buy nothing groups, curb alerts, free cycling, all those things, dumpster diving, the things that people self-organize to create the change they want to see. That is what's extremely inspiring to me, because I know that we're on our way to long-term system change. Next slide. Finally, the last one is the power to transcend paradigms. And this is when it gets kind of very meta and very just like, but the point is that when we kind of even think outside of paradigms, that's when we really have the ability to kind of see the system in a way that it's just very clear what we can focus our energy on. So that's how, last slide, next slide. And that's how I will say this system view helps us to rise above the noise of low impact solutions. It allows us to feel confident about where our energy is being spent, and it helps us better cope with high levels of uncertainty. Next slide. And so that is where I'll end. That's some of my information, and I hope you get a chance to read it. And if you have questions or want to talk about it, please feel free to email me at any point. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachna. Really appreciate it. Thank you for reminding us to think more broadly as we're problem solving. So next up, we have Rafaelo Villavicencio coming on to talk about the Philippines and what's going on there, particularly around the tourism industry, I believe. So will you be sharing your slides, Rafaelo? Are you good, or do you need us to share?
I can share my own slide.
Okay, take it away.
Can you see it now?
Yes, I see it.
Great.
If you press Control L, you can share the whole screen.
Okay.
And I'll be giving a 5-minute, 5-minute and 2-minute warning.
Here. Uh, uh, um, and I'm here to share Mother Earth Foundation's programs and zero waste actions in the Philippines. And again, we're so glad to hear amazing zero waste stories and journeys, as well as with amazing speakers who shared their expertise earlier. So first, I would like to share about Mother Earth Foundation. We are a NGO in the Philippines, actively engaged in waste, toxic and waste, and we're known for decentralized waste management approach, where we partner and collaborate with different stakeholders like the local government units, private sector, schools, and even island communities. So our vision is a zero waste society, living an ecological healthy lifestyle that upholds environmental, climate, and social justice. But in order for us to do this, we hope to champion
Rafaela, I think your internet is a little bit sketchy there.
environment, climate, and
Yeah, that's better.
social justice by mainstreaming zero waste systems and solutions.
It,
So
it,
late partner with Gaia to um, host and invite implementers.
Hey, Rafaelo, I'm going to be sharing the screen because I think it's taking up too much information. And
Oh.
let's see if that helps the
Okay.
connection. Okay. Yes. Okay. So let's try that. Okay. How
about now?
that? That's a lot better. Okay.
Yes. If you can share.
I still don't hear
Please.
very well. Okay.
Hello? Is this better? Okay. Great, thanks. Can you share the slide now?
I'm
Okay,
sharing,
great,
yeah.
thanks. So
That's much better.
again, specifically, these are some of our
Perfect.
programs where we partner with different cities and communities and island communities like Sikihor, uh, like this, Sikihor. Okay, great. So Sikihor is one of our partner island communities in the Philippines, which is located at the central part of the country. And Sikihor is known as the healing island because it's like good for your mental health, for your wellness, because the nature, the percentages, and the majestic sunsets are just a thing of view. So you can really relax and enjoy living in that island. Next slide, please. There. So Siquijor is the third smallest province in the Philippines. It has 6 municipalities and 134 barangays. Barangays in the Philippines is like the smallest political unit or one of the smallest organized communities in the Philippines where they have their own set of local officials. It has a population of 103,395, but it significantly increases because of the influx of the tourists. Next slide, please. And given that the Philippines and the Siquijor is part of the Coral Triangle, the Coral Triangle is a marine area located in the Western Pacific Ocean. So it also includes the waters of Indonesia, Malaysia, Papua New Guinea, Timor-Leste, and Solomon Islands. And this Coral Triangle provides food, income, and protection from storms. And it caters on 120 million people, which relies on this Coral Triangle. Specifically, next slide, please. Some of the example of this Coral Triangle is the beautiful ecosystem, like the mangrove forest, flora and fauna, and limestones. Next slide, please. And on top of that, they also have this um, forests where tourists and locals can learn um, about the biodiversity, about the trees, and the caves. Next slide, please. Ecosystem. Um, Next slide, please. There. So on top of the forest, on top of the caves, you can also enjoy a beautiful view from the top of the mountain while having your lunch, or just have a relaxing dive live on the mangroves, and of course the underwater life with this beautiful marine sanctuary. But these ecosystems are threatened by um, with the plastic pollution, and with the this is some of the situations at the moment. Next slide, please. So next slide. There. So this is the problem that the island community is facing right now. So of course, as much as they wanted to rely on tourism, they cannot sacrifice the environment and the health of the people and the biodiversity in general. So how can we solve or address this problem, a solution for them? It should be co-created and consulted among different stakeholders. Next slide, please. these are some of the impacts on biodiversity. It pollutes lands, contaminates fresh water, communities' health at risk, animals mistakenly eat choked by plastics. I think we've been seeing a lot on social media about this kind of incidents, and of course, marine pollution. And as you can see on the picture behind, this has been the situation because there are a lot of issues and inefficient systems being faced or um, experienced by the community.
Hey, Rafael, we're almost out of time. Just wanted to let you know about 2 minutes or so.
Yes. Can you go to the slide, please? So, okay, I'll just try to wrap this up. I'm very sorry about the bad internet connection, but this is where our intervention comes in. So it's a Zero Islands project in partnership with the provincial government of Siquijor. It started in year 2019, and this is in partnership with the provincial government, with the 6 municipalities and all of the 134 barangays, and of course with the support of the local partners and international NGOs, and even the Philippine Information Agency and other key stakeholders. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, we really need to have a solid foundation before co-implementing or co-creating solutions. So this is one of our interventions, co-develop with the community, waste audit. It's actually waste assessment and brand audit. I'm sure if you, most of you heard about that tool. It is co-developed with the community to not just assess the waste, but also audit the plastic and the residual waste to identify and look for better alternatives, like the refill and reduce, better plastic, better material design, and other alternative delivery system. Next slide, please. So I guess these are some of our partnership programs with the community. So again, Zero Waste is about empowerment. It's also about sharing expertise, sharing resources, and this is one good example of it. This is a decentralized waste management system where the community themselves operate and manage this facility. So as you can see, no advanced technology needed. It's just the culture. It's just the systems. It's also about the co-planning, co-creation of plans, and design by the community. So they have composting using the parts of banana leaves or the banana trunks, bamboos for the separation of discards, and eco park where they can cater visitors and students and people who want to learn about their MRF or recovery system. And this empowers people to manage and to be accountable with their waste, as well as to help amplify and share the zero waste message among its community members. So it's not just the central government, it's more than community members. Next slide, please. If you can go to the last two parts, I guess I don't have enough time, but maybe the folks can see some of the collection system using bamboos, monitoring as using reusable community innovations, instead of using plastics or artificial materials, they're using these indigenous materials. Next slide, please. And yes, I think you can go further. Just to wrap up my presentation. Yes, so as early as young as 6 to 7 years old, they're involved with this, with alternative delivery stores. And I think this is one of the highlights that we wanted to share. Like before, recovery facility. Now it's different communities, 10% compliance and proper waste segregation. At present, it's at 65%. Before, there's no record of waste diversion rate. Now they've managed to monitor and track this impact of their program. And lastly, next slide, please. The high impact indicator. And then it happens in different communities and in different forms. Next slide. I think this is my last 2 slides. So from these, we wanted to create not just a simple awareness campaign, but as mentioned earlier by Alejandra, it really takes a systems change enabled by conducive policies, and as much as individual actions are significant, it should be a change in system and a change of way of life. And I think that's very important and very powerful in our implementation. Of course, all efforts are recognized, but then again, we're already experiencing a climate crisis. We should journey despite the challenges.
Hey, Dennis.
And we look forward to your questions and queries later on. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Hey, Dennis. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Since we had some technical trouble, I'm wondering if we could go ahead and extend this session for 10 minutes. After the next concurrent session, we're going to go into a break, and so we could maybe just shorten our break so we can just have enough time for our speakers. So maybe we would wrap this up at 5 minutes too. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that sounds good.
You have 2 more speakers.
Yes. Okay, sounds good. So sorry about that, everyone. We were having some issues with the bandwidth connection. But with that, we're going to transition to Whitney. And it was really great to see all your work, Rafaelo, in the Philippines and how you set up the system from scratch. So I'll hand it off to Whitney.
Thank you, Dennis. Can everyone hear me and see my screen?
Yes, and please,
Yes.
everybody show your faces. Thank you.
Okay. So hi, everyone. Thank you so much. It's been an honor being here alongside my colleagues in this session and also hearing the keynote speaker, Alejandra. And so I'm going to share a little bit about myself and East Yard Communities for Environmental Justice and what we've been doing to move towards zero waste. So here's just a little bit about who it is that we are. We organize in Tongva, unceded Tongva territories here in the LA Basin along the 710 corridor from Long Beach to East LA and Boyle Heights. And we're really fighting to address all of the industrial pollution that we see in our communities as a result of environmental racism, and really make it so that our communities are safer, healthier places to live for our families, our loved ones, our community members, and future generations. And we do so in different ways, right? We do so by engaging in policymaking that will directly impact our communities, in the decision-making process, which we've historically been left out of, and also by building and creating the systems that we want to see and the change that we want to see in our communities. So that's been, some of the programs that we have here is a decentralized gardening program where we support community members in growing fruits and vegetables in their home. We also live in communities where we don't have access, right, to fresh, healthy food. And I'll share a little bit more about what else we've been doing in regards to zero waste. So whenever we address any of the issues in our community, there's three main questions that we ask ourselves. It's what is it, right? What's the issue? How is it affecting us? And what can we do, or what is it that we want to do in regards to that issue? And so when it comes to waste, I wanted to show this map, right? I mentioned how it's not a coincidence that we see all of the pollution in our communities. And so this map shows where waste facilities are located here in LA County, and the percentage of people of color. So the darker blue areas in this map show high percentages of people of color in the census tracts. And you can see, right, we have a lot of transfer stations, we have incinerators, and we have landfills that are in or near our communities. And so I'm going to talk particularly about incinerators today. Here in California, there was an influx of incinerator proposals back in the late 1970s and 1980s. And that was because the California Waste Management Board hired consultants, several associates, who created a report that said, these are the communities where you can find least resistance to siting incinerators. And that was our communities, right? Black and brown, immigrant, working class communities. And so our communities, even back then, were fighting against the construction of incinerators and defeated a lot of incinerator proposals. But unfortunately, there's three that were built, one in Stanislaus County, one in the city of Commerce, and one here in the city of Long Beach, which is my community. And right now, there's actually only two that are remaining. The incinerator in Commerce shut down back in 2018. Due to still, community fighting against incineration here in the state, who helped to defeat legislation that would subsidize the incinerator industry. And so part of the reason why we were fighting back then when these incinerators were being proposed, and why we're still fighting to this day, is because we recognize that incineration and burning trash is a harmful practice, pollutes the air that we breathe, and has impacts to our health, right? A lot of what's being emitted into the air are greenhouse gases and toxic pollutants like lead, dioxins and furans, ammonia, and several other pollutants. And that contributes to a lot of the high rates of respiratory illnesses that we see in our communities, the high rates of cancer, and the lower life expectancy that we also see in our communities. And we also recognize that incinerators don't just pollute the air, but they also pollute the land and the water. When you burn something, what remains is ash. And that ash has a lot of toxic chemicals that are concentrated in the ash because of the chemicals that are in the products that we use in a daily basis. And so we've seen that on site, right, incinerators are mismanaging a lot of this ash. So there's ash that's clogging drains, there's ash that's being tracked to and from the facility on the roads. And so we are concerned, right, that this ash is also flying into our communities and that we're also breathing all of that in. And so I also want to do a plug for a report that was released by Earth Justice, and I'll share the link in the chat later, around these last 2 remaining incinerators that we have in California, in Stanislaus County and in Long Beach. And it really goes into the harms on our environment, the harms to our health, and also the financial harms, right? Because incineration is not cheap. It's super expensive. It's inefficient. And just, yes, another plug for read the report. And so when we've had conversations in our community around what we want to do, is one, we want to see a transition from unsustainable waste management practice like landfilling and burning trash and moving towards zero waste. And that when we talk about zero waste, it's also acknowledging the fact that this isn't a new concept, right? The term may be relatively new, but the concept isn't. Indigenous, Black and Brown communities have values and practices embedded within our cultures that have meant little to no waste. And that, you know, also moving towards zero waste, it's not just about moving away from landfilling, which I think a lot of our government officials make a big emphasis around. Landfilling is bad. Yeah, well, so it's incineration. So we need to move away from landfilling, from incineration, and from any other types of facilities that will release toxic emissions into the air, land, or water, as well as the toxic chemicals that are in our products, right? And so there's different things that we've done locally. We've received a lot of support from Zero Waste USA in hosting visioning sessions for our community members here in Long Beach, to figure out, you know, what are the policies, what are the programs, and what is the infrastructure that's going to get us to zero waste. And some of those efforts have also looked like building a community composting hub. Not in the city of Long Beach, like I mentioned, we organize in a lot of different areas. And so in the background, you'll see a picture of a composting hub that we built earlier this year, which we've been able to divert 5,500 pounds so far. And it's amazing to be able to work together in community and transform organic waste into compost, which goes back into nourishing the soil and growing the fruits and veggies that we use. And so at the state level, we've also been able to work with amazing organizations. We've been able to work with Valley Improvement Projects, who's been fighting for decades against their local incinerator at Stanislaus County. We were able to work with Californians Against Waste and Earth Justice, who really helped us to develop policy language around moving California away from subsidizing and incentivizing trash burning in our communities. And so this is AB 1857, which is the bill that we proposed and was authored by Assemblymember Cristina Garcia. And really, this bill, if passed, would do 3 things. It would redefine incineration as disposal, which for decades, incineration here in the state of California has been treated as recycling and is in a weird category called transformation. It would also remove diversion credits that cities count towards their recycling goals from burning trash. And it would also create a grant program to invest in zero waste infrastructure and programs in communities, in our communities, right, that have had these incinerators, but also any other communities that have been relying on incinerators. And this is the journey that it went through. It went through the assembly, it went through these different committees, it went through the Senate, and it went through these different committees. And ultimately, the law, it became law. The bill passed, right? And I just, again, a huge shout out to our co-sponsor team for seeing this through to the finish line, our allies and our partners and community, right? Because it took a lot of convincing for legislators who ultimately agreed that yes, incineration should have never counted as recycling. And we faced a lot of opposition along the way, right? We faced opposition from Covanta, who operates these incinerators. We faced opposition from the city of Long Beach, who owns the incinerator here in Long Beach. We faced opposition from a lot of other cities and agencies, and yeah, just a lot of opposition. But we one, and starting next year, incineration is no longer going to be counted as recycling. Cities will no longer receive that diversion credit. And the grant program was created, but unfortunately, we weren't able to secure funding. So that is our fight for next year. And we hope we can continue to get support from everyone. And with that, I'm gonna go ahead and end it. Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to share. And yeah, if you have any questions or you want to connect further, feel free to let me know. And sorry that I couldn't see the chat while presenting. But yeah, thank you so much. I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll pass it over. Back to Dennis.
Thank you so much, Whitney. That was super awesome. And just so everyone knows, I've also worked with Whitney on this project. I'm also from the Southeast LA area, and so it's very near and dear to my heart. And so I'll go ahead and pass it to Nivi Achanta, and we're going to be hearing about the Soapbox Project and the role of joy in movement spaces and so on. So take it away, Nivi.
Amazing. First of all, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm Nivi. I'm going to start sharing my screen in just a second, but I have two commitments I want to make to you. The first is that we will end on time with our new updated time. And the second is that after this session, you will have stuff that you can implement in your own life, because I know, I mean, we all know how tricky it is to receive bad news every day about the environment and feel like we can't do anything about it. And I want to talk about joy today because I feel like it's not talked about enough. So can I verbally just get confirmation that people can see my screen, because I can't see the, I can't see if I'm properly presenting it. So Dennis,
Yes.
can you? Okay, cool. Let me know verbally if you have any issues with seeing it and I'll fix it. Okay, so I want to talk about joy, and I am really glad our amazing keynote touched on this already. So for those of you who were here since the beginning, like that was such a great lead up on the importance of joy and community and like the framework of why this is so important. And then, you know, Rachna led us into systems change and we got all these examples. But first, this is my favorite gift. So I just want to ask everyone to just breathe in and out. We'll do this one more time because it's been a long day already. Okay, that selfishly is for myself to recenter. So I always like inviting everyone in to my little pre-talk ritual. So there's a couple things that I want to talk about today. The first is the facts of joy. So, I mean, oftentimes I feel like joy is like this buzzwordy, let's all feel happy kind of thing. And it is not that. And so I want to ground us in what I mean when I'm saying that we're talking about joy. Second, I want to give a sort of framework and examples for how this is used. And I invite you all to think about this with me in your own lives as I'm speaking. And then third, as I promised, like how can you apply this in your own life? What are some resources that you could take with you? So that is what we're going to do today. Okay. If my button works. Okay, so first in the chat, I'm going to see if I think I can figure out a way to see the chat. I want to know in the chat, what is one word on how you feel about the climate crisis? And maybe Dennis, what you can do is just shout out, like if there's a bunch of repeat words or if people are, oh, I can kind of see it. Okay, Danielle says daunting, angry,
Okay, cool.
stressed, exhausted, hot. I'm seeing a lot of angry, discouraged, nervous. I relate to all of these emotions. And so, you know, it's like, what are we doing here talking about joy? So thank you for sharing these. Keep putting them in the chat, because I think the first step is to acknowledge how we're feeling, because if we don't acknowledge it, we can't change it. So now I want to talk about, you know, most of you have seen this dog meme of everything is fine. And so again, like framing in what are we talking about joy when the world is burning? So let's just get into some facts. There's this amazing book called Atlas of the Heart. It makes a great coffee table read. Somebody recently gifted it to me and I'm so happy. But Brene Brown, who researches emotions, says, I love thinking of joy as the good mood of the soul. While experiencing joy, we don't lose ourselves. We become more truly ourselves. And I think that in a sentence underlines for me why joy is so important. Because if you're thinking about all the 200 plus people that are here live right now, and maybe the hundreds plus that are going to be listening to this recording, we can only do our best work if we expand our capacity. We can't do our best work like sitting in our angry hidey holes and just like turning inwards. And so joy unlocks all of these different possibilities. And we know by now that if we're talking about climate, like reframing systems, we need to talk about possibilities. So I'm just going to invite you 30 seconds, maybe 20 seconds, just like think about something that makes you happy. I find that a lot of people think about nature. Brene Brown has this concept of a picture memory of just very clearly visualizing what makes you happy. You can also do this after the session where you just draw what matters to you, whether that's your family, whether that's your friends, whether that's like a specific point in nature. If you want to share it in the chat, go ahead, but really just, we have to anchor ourselves on what makes us happy and joyful so we can think about it. So really quickly, I don't want to talk too much about myself, but to give you some context about why I'm even talking about this. I used to work in corporate America. I sort of hated my life. I was like, everything I'm doing is purposeless. There's so many crises going on. What is the point? And the more I talked to people, the more I realized literally every single person feels this way. And if everyone feels this way, that's a problem. It's not a me problem, it's a society problem. So I started an organization called Soapbox Project, which is a community that comes together to take bite-sized actions that work for us. Because as our speakers today were saying, like, systems change is about autonomy, it's about sovereignty, it's about doing things that are aligned with our values, with our communities. And so Soapbox is an organization where people can figure out what these things are, because it can be really daunting. Someone said that as their word in the chat. It can be really daunting to figure out how to take action on the climate crisis. And throughout my journey, I realized that a big feeling of what I was experiencing was overwhelm and judgment from other activist groups, or even especially from other activist groups. And I wanted to create a space where I felt safe to ask questions, to not take like an all or nothing approach. I didn't know then that if I wanted to quit my job. I just wanted some guidance on how to be a little bit better. So that's basically why this concept of joy and imagination and gratitude is important. And I'm angry, and I want to just say that because those emotions can coexist. You can be angry and you can be joyful, and like I hope for all of us that that's a place where we can all come together. So as I promised, joy isn't just a buzzword, it is necessary to our survival, and I wanted to explain some of the concepts behind that. So first, joy opens up our minds to play, and play is unscripted. And the climate crisis, so basically in this book called, it's by Chip and Dan Heath, I'm forgetting what it is, but I'll tell you in the end, like about changing. Oh, it's called Switch. So in this book, they talk about how fear and negativity are really motivating emotions when the goal is specific, but not when we have to create systems change. So joy helps us access unscripted futures that we won't be able to do with fear and negativity. It is deeply tied to gratitude and increases our well-being. And as I said, like, we need our own well-being if we hope to serve others and the planet. Joy creates something called a cognitive alternative. So this is a behavioral psychology concept of an alternate vision that people can work towards. And this compelling vision is like the thing, I mean, you've all experienced this. A compelling vision is the single most important thing to get people on board with taking the actions we need. We need a very clear, compelling alternative to the doom and gloom. And finally, joy helps us build purpose in a way that negativity doesn't. So those are some facts for people that are still not sold with the concept on joy. Very quickly, we are going to just go over 3 examples of joy at work because it exists all around us. So there's a book called The Happy City. I highly recommend it. And one thing this author says is sustainability and the good life can be byproducts of the very same intervention. So I want to challenge people to, instead of thinking we need to solve the climate crisis, maybe we need a new question. Maybe it's, how can we design a joyful life for everyone on the planet? And that includes, you know, our microorganisms and animals and biodiversity. Second, I was being a little quirky with this title. There's longevity studies showing that moving naturally, so being in nature, having a purpose, downshifting, which means carving out time to de-stress, those comprise blue zones in the world where people live the longest. So this is my case that all climate activists should actually focus on joy and improve our well-being. And the third one is circularity. So I would love to see your examples of joy at work in your own life where the Venn diagram of joy and sustainability are overlapped. This is a picture of my dining table that's actually right behind me. Everything in my house basically is from buy nothing. And that for me was such a great example of sustainability and circularity, bringing me so much joy. I got a free cappuccino machine. I got to meet my neighbors, and it's truly amazing. And it's not a sacrifice like we often hear in the climate context. So the last thing that I'll leave you with is like, okay, we're talking about joy, community. My dare for all of you, my call to action is do something with people today. And that can be as simple as saying hi to your neighbor. That can be as simple as, you know, maybe you've been wanting to plant something in your garden for a long time. Do something with people. What this looks like at Soapbox is going from overwhelm to action, isolation to support, and anxiety to progress, because we all need a sense of progress. And so I'll kind of skip over this slide, but the two things that I'll talk about is local friendships for me are so important to drive sustainable behavior change. Because if your friend invites you to a party, you'll go. If your friend invites you to serve meals, you'll at least hear me, you'll go. But if I have to do any of these do good stuff by myself, I am way less likely to do it, even though I consider myself a good person. So whether it's joining a community like Soapbox, we have 3 cohorts a year where you can join and like focus on your climate anxiety. At the end of this slide, I also have a bunch of free resources, communities that you can join. But I cannot emphasize enough that all of the things we learned today are so important. All of the case studies we learned, all of the examples of cities, but we have to take action on it. We have to actually go to our workplaces or our places of living and implement these things, because otherwise, like, my question is, what's the point of knowledge if you're not going to act on it? So that's my takeaway for you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen in just a second. If you want to learn more about Soapbox, that's a QR code. But I basically just want to make sure that everyone is equipped with the resources that they have. So I'm going to point out this last slide with that, with a bunch of resources that you can, if you want to screenshot this, you can. If you want to get in touch with me, this QR code works. So I just want to make sure that we ground ourselves in that before the rest of your amazing day in this conference and things like that. So thank you all for listening. Ashley, the name is The Happy City. Yeah, okay, I ended with a minute to spare.
All right. Thank you so much, Nivi. All right. How about a round of applause, everyone, to all of our amazing speakers in this plenary session. We had a little bit of a technical issue, but thank you so much for your patience. And yeah, I think broadening and reframing our perspectives will help inform like not burning out in these movements. So I really appreciate you ending with that, Nivi. So I'll pass it back to Ruth. Seems like we're pushing things back a little bit. So yeah, thank you.
Hi, this is Chris. We're about to start the concurrent sessions. You'll see in the chat there are links available to go to your next session. If you'd like to start going there, please do so now. And we will meet back here after the concurrent sessions for the break.